He does a good job. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Here we are again. I don't know, maybe Virginia and Carol, you're watching on the live stream. Good morning. If you're joining us on the live stream, we're studying Exodus. I don't think I mentioned that last week. So good morning to you. We're studying Exodus, and we're actually into the text of Exodus today. Good morning. I came in, it was the Weems and me, and we were kind of joking that, where two or three are gathered, and everyone's trickling in. And so I told them about, I have had a long interest in the history of the churches in Nashville, where I grew up. Reputation is Jerusalem. Did they think of that, of Nashville as Jerusalem out in West Tennessee, kind of in the 40s and 50s? In Henderson, yeah. It was the density of churches of Christ in Nashville, which was kind of made it unique. There's very, very few geographical locations that had that dense a population, that many congregations. I've found well over 200 that have existed just in the county. It's quite a lot. And so I had an idea that I needed to visit a lot of places on a Sunday night, back when we had Sunday night church, to meet the people who would be at Sunday night church, because those were the likeliest people to know the history, or know who had the history, or know who had something in a shoebox about the history of the churches. And so I went to Philippi Church, which, as the name would indicate, this was an old church. And back in the 1830s, it was in the country. And of course, suburban Nashville has swallowed it up. And so it's still there. And I drove by and looked at the site. Of course, no website. Called the phone number, no answer on the phone number. Looked at the sign, 5:30 Sunday night. So I drove there 5:30 on Sunday night. The preacher, the song leader, and me. And we had Sunday night church. The preacher made announcements. The song leader announced the songs, and we all joined in, and he preached and extended the invitation, and we all stood and sang. I was a little nervous, and he called on our visitor to dismiss us in prayer. It was very sweet. It was just the three of us. But it counts, right? Just two or three. I don't know what they would have done if I hadn't shown up. They might have just gone right along. So I don't know if they're still there. But
said where two are gathered together.
Where two are getting, that's right. So good morning. Let's look at Exodus. The semester granted is ambitious to do all of Exodus in a semester, but we're not going to go verse by verse. Excuse me. I took the suggestion and decided to cough too. The quantity of material that we're going to cover is not, we're not going to hit everything, and so we'll be selective. I suggested last week that you may just want to read about the first 11 chapters, because we'll be there for a few weeks. I passed out a reader's guide. I think you may all have gotten one last week. Did anyone not and want one? Kind of an outline of Exodus. This helps, I hope, your own study. And so I can't assume that we've all read. But then again, I don't want to read it for you and we can't cover everything. So I'm going to hope that you're already reading, and you can read as far ahead or not as you can, but I'll assume that you're reading and the primary study is yours. I don't think I've said that quite as explicitly, but I kind of think of my own teaching as I just want to help you do your study. That's the kind of teaching that I find most helpful, is someone who says, I want to help you do your own study. And here we are all as a church kind of studying the same thing together. So as the church studies the book of Exodus together, I hope that what we do here is helpful for you. Now, having said that, a couple of outlines of Exodus, both of which kind of break up the first about 11 chapters as a unit that kind of hang together to get us to the actual Exodus. And I joked last week that I looked and didn't find any typos. Well, there is one. If you look on the first outline, chapter 7, verse 8 to about the end of chapter 11, the plagues Exodus. That should be the plagues and the Exodus. Well, okay. Okay. I think I said this as we started Mark a year ago, that reading narrative is in some ways one of the easier genres to study because we're already familiar with stories. We're already familiar with characters and kind of plots, and the characters have speaking roles, there's dialogue, and there's setting, there's all the features of narrative. A temptation when we read narrative is to speculate and fill in the gaps where the narrator doesn't tell us something, and we wonder, which is natural. So I'm not slapping anyone's hand because we all do this. Or to try to get inside the characters' minds and wonder what they were thinking. Again, it's natural. Maybe it's unavoidable. Although I wish we wouldn't do it because it's interesting, kind of thing. I wonder what they were thinking. But it doesn't get us anywhere because we don't know, we can't know. But what we do see is what the narrator chooses to include. What we do have is what the narrator, where the narrator will give a character something to say. Not everyone in a story has a speaking role. So who speaks and what do they say? As we'll see today, not every character in the story even has a name. So as you prayed for the little people, well, we got a couple of little people in the story in Exodus 1 who are named, and one really big, important, quote unquote, important person who's not named. So what narrative will do, it's already selective in what we're not time traveling. So we're not going back and re-experiencing the past. There's lots of things that we could say, but the narrator chooses not to. Sometimes, to use kind of cinematic terms, sometimes we're looking back with a wide-angle lens and there's a lot going on in the scene. Sometimes it's very tight. It's a very tight shot. We don't see the countryside from 10,000 feet up. We're inside the house with just one family. We know there's lots of houses and lots of families, but we're right here with this one. Similar with biblical narrative. So instead of kind of speculating, I wonder what they're thinking. And I fall into this too. We're better served to look at what the narrator says and then ask, why this? Okay? Well, last thing, I mentioned this last week, the driving questions behind biblical narrative ultimately center on the main character. Who is God? What is God doing? What is revealed about him? What does he reveal about himself? What does the narrator say about God? We could call it a theological question or a doctrinal question. That's the ultimate theological question. Who is God? Ultimate doctrinal question. Who is God? And then, who are we? And what is our place in the world? What are we to do? Who are we to be? Those are theological questions, doctrinal questions. If we ask those questions, we'll be well served. Who is God? Who does God reveal himself to be in this event? in this storyline, in the unfolding of the narrative that I will tell you, what does it show us about God? I think it may be helpful to look at Exodus as one, here I am to the end of 2 Kings, as one part of a story that is about that much, from Genesis to 2 Kings. So we have the book of Exodus as the whole book. So I think it's helpful for us. That's why I suggested to read all of it all the way through, to have a sense of the whole. What we have is we have the whole book. In other words, and again, I don't know exactly how the Bible is written, but I don't know that in my mind as a kid, I thought someone off to the side was kind of taking notes as it happened. Which they may have been taking notes as it happened.
The Holy Spirit.
Maybe in some way. So I don't know what it looked like, but I do know that what we have is the whole book as a whole book. And so in some sense, we begin with the end in mind. So there's some goal in mind when we get the whole book of Exodus. We also have the book of Exodus, not just as its own entity, but we have it as one part of a multi-part narrative that goes all the way to 2 Kings that tells the whole story. So as we saw last week, we opened Exodus 1. It relies on and assumes what we saw just a page over at the end of Genesis. So already the story of the book of Exodus relies on another scroll, the book of Genesis, and it's going somewhere. In other words, what we see told in Exodus is trying to get us ready to move to the next part of the story, which will end in 2 Kings, which is to explain to us, Israel, looks like, that's my provisional understanding of this, is how it is you got to Babylon and what that means. I think that's where we're getting. I think that's where we're driving. I think this chunk of text is one part of a much larger narrative, and the whole kind of exists as a whole in the sequence that it's in after the exile, and it helps explain to the Israelites, tribe of Israel, tribe of Judah, how it is you've gotten where you are and what that means. They were in crisis after the exile. I guess the short answer is they were in a crisis. A theological crisis too. Where is God? I thought we were the promised people in the promised land. But we had a civil war and tried to kill each other. We split. We split into two kingdoms. And first our brothers in the north were swallowed up by the Assyrians, and we've been swallowed up by the Babylonians, and we have been physically taken out of the land promised to our ancestor. What does that mean? Do we have a future? Where is God in this awful event? That's my provisional understanding for how to make sense of Exodus. It's one part of something that relies on what precedes it, and it anticipates what follows, and it helps Israel understand who God is and who they are. Okay, having said that, let's look at Exodus 1 and 2. Now, the way that our lessons are structured, we'll spend some time in chapter 3 next week, Lord willing. If you'd like to read all the way to chapter 11, that's kind of where we're going to be for a while. The whole of this basically is prior to the going out of Egypt. Again, I think it's safe to assume we who get Exodus, we know that God has delivered our ancestors out of Egypt. We know that. Now again, the people who were experiencing these events didn't know that until they happened, right? But the people who are reading this book, reading the book we're reading, hearing the book that we're reading, being told these stories, they already know we've been led out of Egypt. How did it happen? Like when your kids say, tell me that story again. You know, they know the story. Or you get around family reunions and you tell the story about the funny thing the kid did again. You have those stories. I tell stories about me doing things, and all it takes is one offhand comment and like, well, you remember when you were 4 and you know how that, and you tell and you retell the stories. What you remember and how you remember it shapes who you are. Tell us the story of the Exodus again. Okay, we already know we've been taken out. How is it that we've been taken out? Okay. Speaking of selectivity, look at the first few verses of chapter 1 down to about verse 15. The end of Genesis 50 with Joseph and his brothers going down into Egypt. And then the curtain comes up. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt. A little miniature genealogy. Okay? Total of them is 70. Joseph already there. Joseph and all his brothers. Now what I find most helpful is to look at how the narrator frames things for you. He helps you, the reader or the hearer. He helps you know what to think about the things that he's narrating. Sometimes we'll pause on the explanation and we'll go back and we'll see the characters on scene. So if you want to think of it like in theatrical terms, where you're watching a play and they'll do something and maybe they'll pause and then you'll hear the voice from off stage say, now meanwhile back at the ranch, or something like that, and the narrator's supplying the information that is critical that you need so that you understand what happens the next time the curtain comes up and the setting has changed, the scenery's changed, they're wearing different clothes, it's different people, there's people coming in like, who are you coming in off the side? Okay, so the narrator supplying explanation as I read biblical narrative is just probably one of the most critical things here, because that's the narrator helping us. Okay, now, verse 6. Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation eventually died. But the Israelites were fruitful, increased rapidly, multiplied, became extremely numerous, so that the land was filled with them. I remarked last week, if we've remembered Genesis, this language reminds us, it takes us right back to Abraham. So as we closed last week, right back to Abraham. Abram, I will make you a great nation. I will make you exceedingly numerous. Will fill the earth. Okay? A new king who did not know about Joseph came to power in Egypt. Again, we assume that you know about the king who did know Joseph. What do you mean there's a king who doesn't know Joseph? What does that mean? Well, we'll have to go back to Genesis to understand what it is about a king who knows Joseph. Okay? Why does knowing Joseph matter at all for this story here? Again, it assumes what happens earlier. They're numerous, they're powerful, we must deal shrewdly with them. I'm kind of summarizing. If they join our enemies, it's over. Okay, so he's nervous, he's paranoid, he's kind of thinking geopolitically. Is he thinking about the Phoenicians? Is he thinking about someone up in Syria? Of course, they're down in Egypt. The land bridge between the two, what we call Palestine or the land of Israel, the Promised Land, that's a hotly contested land bridge, because whoever controls that is either a little closer to the folks in the north or they're a little closer to Egypt. So, okay, they build these cities, these supply cities, and they're using the Israelites as forced labor We're making strategic moves against our enemies. And we've got to keep these people under our thumb lest they join in with our enemies and kind of become an enemy. Okay? They worked them ruthlessly. This is verse 13. Made their lives bitter with difficult labor. Brick and mortar, field work, ruthlessly imposed all this work on them. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, okay, here's where the focus goes from a wide lens way down to very narrow. Okay. We have two people on the bottom. We already know they're the oppressed, pressed down, not really intruders, but they're not us. Okay, we look around good and we realize, my goodness, if these people got a mind to it, we could have a real problem on our hands. So it's not like we've been invaded by an enemy from without. We've got enemies out there, and if these people on the inside turn against us, so there's kind of, the perception is there's this internal threat. So they're the threatening other person. So we're going to keep them down. So we've got two of all of that massive people, we've got two midwives, two women who are on the bottom. They're on the outs. They're the ones with a target kind of on their back, so to speak. The first, whose name was Shiphrah, and the second, whose name was Puah. Okay? When you help the Hebrew women, so here we've got quoted speech. Okay? When you help the Hebrew women give birth, observe them as they deliver. If the child is a son, kill him. If it's a daughter, she may live. Okay? So says Egypt. Okay? We must limit the potential. Seems like there's a military strategy here. We must limit the potential fighters if we get rid of the boys. And if we keep the girls, that will help us absorb this people into us. Kind of sounds awful, breeding stock. And so we will become more numerous in time. So you think long term, 20 years down the road. 20 years down the road, we won't have any of these Israelite boys fighting against us because there won't be any boys. And over time, we will assimilate. Okay, is that a strategy? That could well be. Okay, we get it looks like a conversation between the king of Egypt and these midwives. Okay, the king of Egypt, who is the most important person. Lots of scholars of Exodus have really tried to wonder and tease out, who is this Pharaoh? Okay. Who is the Pharaoh of the Exodus? Lots of commentators trying to figure this out. Because what they want to know is, when did the Exodus happen? Okay. Trying to line up Egyptian history with what we see in Exodus. Okay. Interesting. I don't know. And I don't know it's, in some ways, the major driving point. It looks like whoever the big important Pharaoh is, they would have known. It was no secret. He doesn't get named. But two Hebrew midwives who were nobodies, they are named. Who's really important? Okay. These two Hebrew women. Okay, I don't know if you have a footnote in your Bible. This Pew Bible does not. Shiphrah means beauty. If you've got a study Bible, or you look it up online, now you say things like this and they're already ahead of you looking at online commentaries. Well, beauty, beautiful. Puah is sparkle. Sparkle. So it's in, I think, go with the poetry here. How poetic is it that in this awful, dark, terrible, terrifying, oppressive, miserable scene, there is something beautiful, there is something sparkling. It is not all over yet. Okay? So we, in the audience, we see all this, and we see the dark, and we see two little sparkling lights, two beautiful lights. Okay? That's great. Pharaoh, don't know who Pharaoh is, but we know who Shiphrah and we know who Puah are. And that's critical. The midwife, and again, how they kill the boys, I don't know. Obviously, they're helping with birth, so how do you make it look like a stillbirth? That's the question. I don't know. Figure it out. Take care of the boys. Keep the girls. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. So if I'm hearing this story, and I already know that we're coming out of Egypt, already I know part of our coming out of Egypt is due to two women who feared God more than the king of Egypt and flatly disobeyed. They let the boys live. The king of Egypt summoned the midwives. Why have you done this and let the boys live? The Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They're vigorous. Again, how do they carry this out? I don't know. They give birth before the midwives can get through them. What would the midwives have done? Good question. Okay, it's enough of a bluff. Okay. Now look at verse 20. Our narrator is giving us commentary. Not just a narrative, not just a sequence of events, not just a reporting of speech, not just a chronicle. He's interpreting. God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very numerous. Since the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Pharaoh then commanded all his people, you must throw every son born to the Hebrews into the Nile, but let every daughter live. So he's trying the same old thing again. Okay? The preemptive strategy at birth isn't working. All right, we'll get them another way. Okay? Not quite cartoonish, but almost cartoonish. He clearly is not going to win this one. Undaunted, he tries again. Okay? Which now I want to know, well, how's that going to turn out? Okay? That's chapter 2. Now a man from the family of Levi married a Levite woman. The woman became pregnant, gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. She could no longer hide him. She got a papyrus basket, coated it with asphalt and pitch, placed the child in it, sets it off. Maybe someone will find this child and save him. Okay? So, interesting. Throw him in the Nile to get rid of him. She puts him in the river to save him. Pharaoh's daughter. Again, it's kind of a subversion. Here's the man who wants them gone, capital gone. And it's his own daughter who's down there bathing, and here's the boy. So we already know how this happens, and we're watching it. Again, we're at the family reunion. We already know the story. Tell us the story again. And this whole time, it's like, you know how it's going to happen. Yes, put him in the river. Yes, tell us again. Pharaoh's daughter, she hears the boy crying, and out we draw him. Mo'oshah, Moshe, Moses. I drew him out. Okay, there's a pun on the name. Again, lots of Hebrew boys thrown into the Nile, probably. Of all of the boys, here's one. We drew him out. In a sense, Pharaoh wants to throw him in. God draws him out. Okay? So when the narrator gives us a name, important. Now, verse 11, 2:11, years later, after Moses had grown up. So again, the narrator doesn't mind at all to skip over all this time. We read it and we're like, I wonder what happened to Moses as a child. Of course we're curious, especially when we're children, we're curious. So in the nicest way possible, doesn't matter, don't worry about it, move on. Okay? Don't waste our time trying to speculate. Wonder what happened when Moses was a boy. Doesn't matter what happened when Moses was a boy. The narrator is more concerned to speed us up. Years later, he goes out to his own people and observed their forced labor. How long? Don't know. Years. Long time. Been a long time. This has gone on for a long time. I think that's the point. This situation, this oppression, this selective weeding out of the boys, keeping the girls, assimilating into, we'll assimilate them into the Egyptian population by way of the girls, and we'll try to weed out and thin out the boys. They won't be able to fight against us. Our enemies won't be able to turn these outsiders against us. We're going to work them. Meanwhile, we've got work to do. So we're fortifying ourselves. Looks like a paranoid, the worst possible way, a paranoid Pharaoh. I guess some would say, oh, you're shrewd, but awful. The upshot is when you're in the ditch mixing the mud, it's awful, okay? He sees this. He saw an Egyptian striking a Hebrew. Looking around, seeing no one, he struck the Egyptian dead, hit him in the sand. The next day he went out, saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, why are you attacking your neighbor? Excuse me. Who made you a commander over us? You planning to kill me like you're going to kill the Egyptian? And then, again, if it were cinematic, there would be the dramatic sound effects. Dum, dum, dum. And he runs. He runs. He runs. Our hero, now, I think we know Moses will lead us out. But now that's kind of jeopardized, right? If our hero has done something that gets him noticed, already, okay, we have hopes, but those are uncertain now. Also, our hero's a murderer. He's killed a man, okay? He fled. Pharaoh heard it. He tried to kill Moses. So we've had our hopes kind of, here's one boy, but it's very tenuous. He survived once. Now there's a complication in the storyline. We don't know what's going to happen. Pharaoh tries to kill him again, and he fled. Goes out to Midian, and we see the rest of that chapter 2, an explanation of how we're going to kind of get to where Moses is the Moses we know who's going to come back. Okay. We also see Zipporah. We see Mrs. Moses. Okay. That's how we see Zipporah. She gave birth to a son whom he named Gershom, for he said, I have been a resident alien in a foreign land. So our narrator has interpreted the name of this boy for us. And that's kind of the summary of all of our existence, we Israelites, not only in this story, but that's us if we're reading all of Exodus, in fact, all of Genesis through Kings in Babylon. That's us. We're resident aliens in a foreign land. We're not home. Kind of like Tennesseans come to Texas. I'm out here in a strange land, okay? I'm not home. That's not quite right. That's not fair, is it? We're just more Tennesseans come down here to help these folks out. That's right, okay? We're not home. There's a sense of home, and we're not there. We're not where we need to be. What will happen? Okay, look at verse 23. As time draws to a close, our narrator is going to bring the curtain down. After a long time, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned because of their difficult labor, and they cried out, and their cry for help because of the difficult labor ascended to God. And God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abram, with Isaac, and with Jacob. He saw the Israelites, and God knew. That's powerful commentary on all of these events. So we get little vignettes here and there, a little moment here at the riverside, a little moment here in the birthing room, a little moment here. You know, there's a moment when he sees these guys fighting. There's a moment with his father-in-law, just a moment here and there and here and there. And then the narrator says, let me explain to you what it means. The people groaned, and God heard their groaning. What this tells us of God is he has honored his covenant. He's remembered his covenant. We'll pick up in chapter 3 next time. Let's keep all of these threads going, kind of keep our provisional understanding going, and we'll see how it develops. Hello, son.